Thank you very much. All right, well, welcome to the Climate Safe California webinar series. We're just going to give folks another minute to show up. You are in the right place for phase out fossil fuels. What do they say when you get on a plane? If you're not going where we're going, now's the time to get off. But I think we're all going to the same place together, which is a climate safe future. Thank you all for joining. I see the first question. Yes, the recording will be available, and I notice someone is already typing in the answer to that. We always make our recordings available after the fact, so you can share it with your friends and colleagues who are not able to be here today. Okay, it is now 10 o'clock, and I would like to welcome everybody here and thank you all for coming. My name is Duran. I am Program Manager at the Climate Center. I'm very happy to welcome you all to our webinar, Phasing Out Fossil Fuels, a Just Transition in the Oil and Gas Extraction and Refining Sectors. We've got some great speakers here today, and we're very happy that you could all join us. I want to thank everybody who took the time to be here today, including all of our wonderful speakers. In a few minutes, I'm going to turn it over to Woody Hastings, our Energy Program Manager here at the Climate Center, to introduce our speakers and curate this, what is sure to be a fantastic discussion. Just a couple of words. First of all, I want to welcome you all here, let you know Climate Safe California webinar series is a series of webinars. We have hold on a second, that does not, hold on just one moment if you don't mind, I apologize. And I will do this. Okay, all right, so what is Climate Safe California? Climate Safe California is a policy platform created by the Climate Center, currently endorsed by over 900 industry leaders, elected officials, and others like yourselves. And Climate Safe California calls for more aggressive policies and accelerated timelines in California now. It is a campaign for rapid decarbonization that's going to include phasing out fossil fuels. It's going to include a just transition, and it listens to the science. Our goal is that by 2025, we'll have enacted the bold policies required by science to dramatically reduce emissions, start drawdown, and secure resilient communities by 2030. This is a bold plan, but we believe we can do it. California is the 5th largest economy in the world. The time is now, and we need to lead. And doing it together, we believe that we can. So we hope you will join us and consider joining the 900 plus who have endorsed Climate Safe California. We're going to have several actions for you to take here today. We don't just want you to be passive listeners. We want you to be engaged with us. So the first action I'm going to offer you is the opportunity to join the 900 plus endorsers. I'm going to ask my colleague Nina to drop a link for you all for you to be able to endorse Climate Safe California. And that's going to be in the chat. I believe, Nina, we can still send the chat to the folks. I believe you can do that. So hopefully that won't be any problem. And we ask you to click on that link, and we're hoping to get 50 more endorsements here today, and I'll be reporting on those numbers as we move forward. So if you haven't done so yet, please endorse Climate Safe California. It's a fantastic platform. We hope you'll join with us. This is also part of a series of webinars. Phasing out fossil fuels is part of the solution. So is creating climate resilient communities. I'll talk about that webinar in a moment. We'll be following that with more webinars on clean mobility, natural sequestration, funding climate action, and then we'll be ending in the summer with a policy summit that we hope you will be able to join us in. Our next webinar is on March 24th. Please go to our website at theclimatecenter.org to sign up for that one. We've invited David Hochschild of the Energy Commission, Amy Raval from the Asian Pacific Environmental Network. We'll also have some great industry leaders, including Artie Arian from Renewable America and David Burdick from Terra Verde Energy. It's going to be a great webinar as well. We hope you'll join us for that. Of course, none of this would be possible without our sponsors and our promotional partners. So I'd just like to take a moment to thank all our sponsors: Renewable America, Enphase, Jackson Family Wines, Also, MCE, Marin Community Energy, Willow Creek Wealth Management, thank you for your support. The Bay Area Air Quality Management District, and many of these organizations, by the way, have also endorsed Climate Safe California. So when you endorse, you'll be joining with them in doing so. And also Peninsula Clean Energy, Sunrun, and Terra Verde Energy, all of which have supported us both with their dollars and their expertise and their time, and we thank them. Of course, we wouldn't be able to get the word out without our promotional partners. So just a moment to thank all of them: Better World Group, Acterra, Grid Alternatives, the Community Environmental Council, Local Government Commission, Joint Venture, Silicon Valley, the California League of Conservation Voters, Climate Resolve, Clean Coalition, and Drawdown Bay Area. This is part of our coalition for Climate Safe California, and we thank them all for being part of this program. I'm going to stop my screen share now and just do a quick check here. I'm looking to see if I don't believe that we've been joined by the senator yet. So I will just go to my notes here to let you know that we have got a great opportunity. One way for you, thank you. One way for you to be part of this program is to send us your questions through the Q&A. We'll have a couple of moments to answer questions. We're about 10:35, and again, a little after 11, we'll have a chance to answer your questions. So please keep those questions coming through the Q&A. We'll answer whatever we can during the time that we have allotted, and we'll also try to answer them through the Q&A typing section. And thank you, Alexandra. MCE is the correct name for MCE. So MCE serves a larger community, and I wanted to thank you for that note. So we have the links in there. I'm going to, at this point, introduce my colleague, Woody Hastings, to do a little bit of framing and get us started here. So I'll be back at the end. And in the meantime, thanks again for coming. And I'd like to turn it over now to Woody Hastings. Woody, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Duran, and good morning, everyone. Thanks all for being here. My name is Woody Hastings. I'm the manager of the Climate Center's new Phase Out Fossil Fuels program, proudly celebrating 10 years with the Climate Center as of this past December. In today's webinar, we're going to hear from 4 presenters, 2 work in the oil and gas extraction side of things, Ingrid Brostrom from the Center for Race, Poverty, and the Environment, and Gustavo Aguirre Jr. of the Central California Environmental Justice Network. And 2 who focus on the refining sector, Greg Karras, for many years at Communities for a Better Environment, and now the principal at Community Energy Resource, and Steve Gary, a retired refinery worker of many years who is deeply engaged in just transition issues. We've brought these 2 facets of the oil industry together to try to get a full picture in California and to see, in part, where there are opportunities to collaborate or at least coordinate efforts to foster a just transition. In September 2020, Governor Newsom issued Executive Order N7920, the one about phasing out cars by 2035, but it also included item 7, which states that the Labor and Workforce Development Agency, Office of Planning and Research, and other state agencies shall develop by July 15th, 2021, and expeditiously implement a just transition roadmap, consistent with the recommendations that were contained in the June 2020 report, Putting California on the High Road, a Job and Climate Action Plan for 2030. That's the Carol Zabin report by UC Berkeley Center for Labor, Research, and Education. That report was commissioned pursuant to state law. And it's not clear what the process for that roadmap is at this time, and July is coming right up. So pressure needs to be put on the administration to abide by its own executive order. California is an oil state, but the oil and gas industry is an industry in decline and has been since the mid-'80s. Most of the extraction is centered in Kern County, and we'll hear more about that. And more about that, sort of the state of the industry, how much is still being extracted, how many are employed from our first presenters. The numbers can be sliced and diced in a number of ways, so they'll help to unpack that. We'll also hear about how there is an amount of work, decades really, to remediate and seal old, abandoned, orphan wells. And that'll take government and industry support because that's not a profit-making endeavor. So there are 15 on that. So that's the extraction side of things. On the refinery side, there are 15 refineries in California, about 7 in Southern California, 5 in Northern California, 3 in Bakersfield. Here's a wrinkle. 2/3 of the oil that California refines does not come from California. It's imported. So if we stop drilling in California, will we just import more? We'll hear more about this dynamic in the second half of the webinar. Also, we get this steady drumbeat of reminders of the hazards of oil with accidents, spills, unintentional middle of the night refinery flares and explosions, most recently an oil spill in the San Francisco Bay. Suffering for fence line communities. So we must extract ourselves from fossil fuel extraction and refining if we're going to alleviate the hazards to fence line communities and have any hope of avoiding the worst of what the climate crisis might mean. But we must do it in a way that doesn't leave communities, the workers, the industry, and their families in the lurch. How do we ensure that wages and benefits in the new economy are at least as good as what workers have today? Before I introduce our first presenter, I just want to offer the following caveat. The perspectives and opinions of each of our presenters are not necessarily representative of the position or the policy of the Climate Center. So I would now like to hand it off to our first speaker, Ingrid Brostrom, someone I've come to know over the past few months. I'm sorry. Oh, do we have? Oh, we have Senator Wiener with us.
Yes,
okay,
we do.
I will be quiet and hand it off to Senator Wiener.
Yes, I'd like to just take a moment to welcome you, Senator Wiener. Senator Wiener represents the 11th District, San Francisco, and portions of San Mateo County. You've been a leader in environment, racial, social, gender justice for a long time. We're very happy you could be here to talk about some of your hopes for the current legislative session. Thank you, Senator Wiener.
Thank you, and thank you to the Climate Center for the incredible work that you do and for convening everyone today for this critical conversation. Where we really put all the pieces together instead of viewing things in a silo, which is sometimes the incentive in the legislative process because you have one bill or another bill. Trying to really thread everything together is so important because you have to look at this all together in terms of reducing our carbon footprint, reducing our reliance on fossil fuels, transition of the workforce. So we are keeping people in good paying jobs. These are all incredibly important things. And I really want to just acknowledge and thank Ingrid at CRPE, who are the sponsor of SB 467, our bill to ban and phase out fracking and other destructive oil extraction techniques as well. They're in addition to providing required setbacks around oil extraction so that we are no longer behind places like Texas and Oklahoma, which unlike California, acknowledge the public health problems with drilling and extracting close to where people live and send their kids to school. When we look at California's climate goals and our reliance on fossil fuels or need to transition our carbon footprint, I think there are two things I want to really point out. One is that sometimes when we're pushing for more clean energy and to move away from fossil fuels, we're told, well, what does it matter? California is only 1% of the world's carbon emissions. So if we do it, it's only 1% at the most. And then you still have China and India and the rest of the US and so forth. And what I think is so important for people to understand is that with California, it's not just the sheer physical impact of what we do, it's the message we send. Around the world, California is appropriately viewed as a progressive bastion, that we're in the forefront. What happens in California eventually happens elsewhere. And so when California takes progressive, innovative steps, hard ones, others watch and they see, and ultimately it has an impact elsewhere. And when California fails to take forward-looking progressive steps around energy or otherwise, that is also noted. And it makes it harder to send that message in other states or in other countries. And so California needs to succeed. And so when California pioneers and continues to build sprawl housing that, contributes to climate change and puts housing in wildfire zones, a very pro-climate change policy, it's hard for us to make that case to the rest of the country that we should have a sustainable housing policy. When we struggle with our transition to 100% clean energy, it's hard to make that case to the rest of the country. And so we need to lead. And when it comes to oil, we need to lead. And California, unfortunately, has not led. I mentioned setbacks where we're behind some very conservative oil extracting states, or the fact that California doesn't even have an oil extraction fee, unlike places like Texas and Alaska. And so California, we need to really get it together and also plan for this trend, because this transition is going to happen one way or the other. We can do it the way that we've done it with coal, where we, due to roadblocks in Congress because of small states that are reliant on coal in their economy, we can just let the industry fall apart and not plan for it and not have that transition. Or we can actually have an orderly transition where we have a pro-climate policy and also are there for workers and make sure that workers can transition to other good paying work. And right now in California, we're taking the former. We're just letting the industry sort of unravel, other than the refinery industry, which, as you heard, is importing a ton of oil from outside of California and also exporting a lot of oil. And I'm glad you're going to be talking about what I think is the false argument that if we restrict oil here, it's just going to be a boon for Saudi Arabia and Russia. I don't think that's an accurate argument. And I'm glad you're talking about it. But we need to get ahead of this. And so I think the first step is to protect public health, and that's what our work around setbacks is, and also to protect the environment and public health in terms of moving away from fracking and cyclic steam and water and steam injection, which has such terrible impacts on our land, on our water, on our air supply, or our air and our water supply, I should say. And so we've introduced what is a large bill, SB 467, and we know it's going to provoke a significant conversation about what do we mean when we say we want to protect public health and our environment. But the other piece of this in terms of climate is, I think, in 2020, we saw a long overdue reckoning and broader based realization and recognition of the structural racism that has infected this country since the beginning. And for a lot of people, when they think about structural racism, they really think a lot about policing and the criminal justice system. That's incredibly important. But if we leave it at, we work to fix policing, to end mass incarceration, et cetera, that's such important work. But if we leave it at that, then we haven't done the complete job, because structural racism goes so far beyond that, as the pandemic has shown us, housing and healthcare, et cetera, and the workforce and who are the frontline workers. But it is also about environmental justice. Environmental justice is racial justice, because we know that if you look at where oil is being extracted, often in very destructive ways, it's typically not in wealthier white communities. It is in low-income communities. It is communities of color. It's where our Black and Latinx kids are living and learning and playing at the playground, and and we are harming these communities so that we can gas to power our cars, et cetera. And so we need to focus on ending that structural racism, because that is what it is, in a way that transitions us to clean energy that everyone can benefit from, so that everyone can have access to zero emission vehicles, not just wealthy people, so that everyone can have that access, so that everyone can benefit from electrification, and so that we stop poisoning our children. So again, thank you for doing this, and I look forward to the work ahead.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Senator Wiener. Really appreciate those comments. Very helpful, and really appreciate you taking the time to be here. All right. Well, so I will now like to hand it off to our first presenter, Ingrid Brostrom of Center for Race, Poverty, and the Environment. And so Ingrid is someone I've come to know over the past few months in work. She's a staunch and savvy advocate for frontline communities and someone who's got a really good grasp on the challenges of navigating a path through to a just transition. So Ingrid, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you. I'm just pulling up my slides. All right, yes, thank you so much for having me. Again, my name is Ingrid Brostrom. I'm the Assistant Director at the Center on Race, Poverty, and the Environment. And we are based in Kern. And that's really important because we can't have a conversation about just transition, especially as it relates to oil and gas in California, without talking about Kern County. Kern County is where more than 3/4 of all oil and gas extraction happens in California. And so for our organization, this conversation is critical. So I'm going to be talking about the environmental justice perspective on transitioning workforce, environment, and the economy. My lens is Kern County, but also want to present a little bit of a statewide perspective as well. First off, I want to say that in a just transition, there's a lot of shared goals, even amongst people that don't often see eye to eye on a lot of things, including in Kern County, which is a very traditionally conservative part of the state. But when you think about just transition, you're thinking about building a thriving and prosperous local economy. You're thinking about how do we build a sufficient tax base to provide all necessary local and social services that are necessary. We're talking about building good, well-paying, and safe jobs, while also making sure that we have healthy places to live, work, and play. And we're also looking at increasing investment in areas that are disproportionately impacted, such as Kern. And so these are all things that don't fall along the political lines. And so we're really hoping that this is a place that we can build consensus in Kern County, as well in California. So I want to start with this slide. So this shows the trends in California. So we see that since 1985 or so, we have been in a pretty much consistent decline in oil and gas production in California. This is anticipated to continue, if not sharpen. And on the right side, and I want you to kind of put this in your mind, we'll come back to it, but we can also see that we have an increasing number of idle wells. So those wells are no longer in production. They're also not properly closed. So they're just sitting in communities across California posing risks. So this is a little bit of the landscape in California. And so we're going to pause on the idle wells, and I'm going to go a little deeper into more of the extraction trends in California. So why are we declining? Why is oil and gas production declining? If you listen to the oil and gas industry, they will tell you it's because of the strict policies and strict regulations we have in California. That's not the case. California does not have the strongest regulatory regulations for the oil and gas industry. We don't even have setbacks, which virtually every other large oil producing state has. But what we do have in California is incredibly heavy and dirty oil. It is expensive to extract and getting more expensive. And so this really comes down to simple, markets. As other places have increased their production because they are accessing cleaner energy sources or cleaner oil reserves, California becomes less advantageous from a pure market. So we're going to continue to see the market push out oil and gas production in California naturally. And again, as the senator mentioned, the decline is inevitable. Our choice is whether we want to have a managed decline or an unmanaged decline. When we start looking at just transition, we need to take a good look at what kind of jobs and where are we really talking about. So this is a busy sheet, but I circled a couple of the numbers that I think we should look at. So in Kern County, we have about 7,000 folks that are in the oil and gas field. And that represents 2%. So it's not insignificant, but it's also not the numbers that we've been hearing from the oil and gas industry. In Los Angeles, which of course is the other area where there's a great deal of extraction, you look at those extraction figures and you have 300 jobs in all of Los Angeles. So these are not the types of figures that you've been hearing from the oil and gas companies. And then at the bottom, you'll see these are statewide figures. And this is for every segment of the fossil fuel cycle. So you'll see estimates between 30, 38,000. So those are the figures. And this is from a report commissioned by UC Santa Barbara, commissioned by the state. So these are the latest figures that we've seen.
Ingrid, if I may just ask back on that slide, we're getting lots of questions from folks. Just to clarifying, what does TF stand for?
Transportation fuels.
Thank you.
So yeah, transportation fuel sector. So again, remind folks to kind of keep in their heads these figures. These are from the report out of UC Santa Barbara. This is what we're hearing from the oil and gas industry. So we're hearing figures of 152,000 direct employees with the oil and gas industry. We're hearing 366,000 jobs from Air Energy. So I would submit that the first thing we ought to do is really land the right figures. So we know what we're working toward. We know what we have to do in order to replace any jobs lost as we are declining off of fossil fuels. One thing that we have in our favor. So these are some figures out of WISPA. And this shows the trajectory over time in just the demographics. So one thing we know about this industry is that the workforce is aging. So you'll see the vast majority of jobs are from folks over 35. And we see that number is increasing over time. I'd also ask you to look at that first column, which is people entering the field out of high school and entering young adulthood. And you'll see in the latest year, 2017, which is, these figures are a little outdated at this point, but only 0.3% of the workforce is under 22. So we know that people are not entering this field. And again, this is going to help us shape the solutions of what do we do with the workforce that currently is in the oil and gas industry. And I'm going to now shift to opportunities because there are opportunities. One, in terms of what we think about when we think about opportunities, I think it's a point well taken that you can't think of any job as being a good replacement job. It is true that oil and gas workers tend to make more, and they tend to require less education than some other fields. So those are things that we need to account for. In addition to having good replacement jobs with high wages, we also need to make sure that as we're talking about what the solutions are, that we're centering worker and community voices. These are folks that are often not involved in the conversation, are not at the table. And so as we plan for our future, making sure that we're really listening to people that are most impacted. We should also think, of course, about reducing greenhouse gas emissions and also how to provide community co-benefits. And that can be many things, but making sure that the communities that have been impacted by the fossil fuel extractive economy, as we transition away, that we're providing benefits to those same communities. So now I want to circle back to the orphan wells. So here, this is a slide that talks about the liabilities for California. And I really, we could talk a lot about the liabilities and how much money it's going to take us to actually close all of the orphan wells. But for now, just focus on the red circle, which is the total number of wells that we anticipate needing to be properly closed and abandoned, plugged and abandoned. So that's a large number of wells. And it's something that we as a state are going to have to grapple with, especially as the fossil fuel industry is in decline. So not only is this a big liability, because these wells are in our communities and they continue to pose risks to communities, they also provide opportunities for jobs. I also want to note that in addition to oil wells, there is a lot of potential for remediation in the state and a lot of need for remediation in the state. I also work on toxic issues in addition to oil and gas. And so I've been really involved in grappling with what do we do about the number of brownfields that again pose risk to communities that they're located in across California. And so again, if you look at the red circle, these are the figures. And in fact, what we're hearing out of Cali, PA is that Cali, PA believes that there's over 200,000 sites that are sitting in our communities that are waiting site characterization, investigation, and cleanup. So in addition to wells, we have just vast amount of land that is sitting unused and dangerous in our communities that also need remediation. Other opportunities, the High Road Training Partnership. We just last week got the 2021 awards, which basically funds planning around Kern County and also Contra Costa. So basically the oil extraction and the refinery centers in California. And this is funding that allows for people to come together in these communities, in these counties, to figure out a path forward. How do we diversify the economy? What sectors are promising for these? How do we make sure that workers are taken care of? So CRPE is definitely involved and partnered as one of the partner leads for the Kern County Workforce Strategy Planning session. And so definitely look forward for people to see more what's happening there. And just very quickly, these are some of the other things that are happening right now. Los Angeles, there's a Just Transition Task Force. California has the Just Transition Roadmap that is due out in July 2021. The California budget has earmarked $300 million for remediation of contaminated sites. And as we heard, SB 467 is moving this year and has a Just Transition piece. And so my final slide, these are my takeaways. Oil and gas extraction is on the way out. And the question for us is, will the decline be managed or unmanaged? The jobs figures are not insignificant, but they're also not insurmountable. Site remediation, both oil sites and toxic sites, are promising avenues for job growth. And in 2021, there's multiple ways that folks can engage in this issue. So with that, I have my contact info up here. I think we're going to save questions for later. And thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ingrid. Very good presentation. It's already generated a lot of questions. I don't want to waste any time, so I'd like to launch right into our next speaker, Gustavo Aguirre Jr. of the Central California Environmental Justice Network, who is someone who is, you can talk to us about the lay of the land, you know, there based in Kern County and what the experiences are there for the fence line communities, frontline communities in that area, and speaking to how we might approach a just transition. Gustavo, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much. Buenos días a todos. Mi nombre es Gustavo Aguirre. My name is Gustavo Aguirre Jr. I am the Kern County Coordinator for Central California Environmental Justice Network. I'm based out of here at downtown Bakersfield. And I'll be talking to you guys from a very granular perspective, from a very localized perspective. Thank you, Ingrid, for giving that very insightful oversight of kind of the macro playing field of what, you know, it takes to operate, you know, in the oil and gas world. I'm gonna transition that now using the lens of a community organizer and someone that uses community science at the very center of advocacy and what I do. And to give you a perspective of kind of where we're at here in Ground Zero in Kern County for the extraction of oil and gas, you know, there's many figures, but roughly around 75% of all the oil and gas that is extracted in California comes from here, from Kern County, right? It comes from the Bow Ridge oil field, it comes from the Sunset oil field, it comes from the Kern River oil field, right? The one of the largest metropolitan oil fields here, actually the largest metropolitan oil field here in Kern County, literally on the banks of the Kern River and the city of Bakersfield, with nearly 10,000 oil wells. And why this is important, right? Why we talk about oil and gas extraction in these communities. Over our heads, currently we're dealing with the county passing an environmental impact report that will change the way oil and gas operations happen here in Kern County. And in theory, what the county wants to do is use a small subset of very localized environmental impact reports to excuse the doubling of expansion of oil and gas drilling here in Kern County. And the troubling part is not that oil and gas will be expanding here in Kern County. The troubling part is where it actually will happen. Like where these communities geographically, geospatially, where these activities will happen, right? For those that aren't fully aware of what kind of operations happen in Kern County, here in Kern County, the vast majority of extraction happens through flood steaming, through extreme methods of extraction, right? Where high velocity pressure, high concentration of chemicals are used to extract very little product out of the ground, right? For every 1 barrel, this is numbers that, I myself sit, aside from being a community organizer and a community science researcher, sit on the AB 617, both at the state consultative group level, where we overlook the blueprint, but also a steering committee member in the community of Shafter, where we talk a lot about air quality and pesticides and oil and gas and toxins. But I also sit with, the president of WISPA, Ms. Kathy, on the SB 83 Underground Injection Control Panel, right? Along with Ingrid's compañero Juan, we sit in this panel where we, for the last 2 years, have looked at the world of underground injection and what water consumption usage means and is to the Central Valley around oil and gas. And what we've seen is the astronomical amount of water that is used during these extractions, right? In the middle of a drought, right? In the middle of one of the worst droughts we recently had in years, just a Kern River oil field was using nearly 8 million barrels of water per month to extract water, right? And out of all that water that was used, the vast majority is actually just wastewater that is injected back into the ground. And we follow the water, we follow the money, right? A lot of this water that is being injected back into the ground goes and is being bought by farmers and is being used to grow crops here in Kern County, right? And then you think about who are the folks that are actually working in these crops? What are they being exposed to? And what kind of opportunities they have here, right? So keep this in mind as I continue my conversation. With this Kern County EIR, what this will do will expand nearly 40,000 plus new oil wells in our community, right? And as Lorelei, our Kern County Planning Commission said, it's only going to affect unincorporated communities, right? It's only going to affect unincorporated communities. Well, that's where Ingrid and that's where our organization, that's where we work at. We work in these unincorporated communities where these tens of thousands of oil well patches actually are, right? These are the communities of Arvin and Lamont, the communities of Shafter, the communities of Lost Hills, right? These communities, in Oildale, across Kern County that are saturated by oil and gas, right? That are at the fence line of oil and gas production. With this, we see the great example that Ingrid stated recently with the economies of scale, right? There comes a point in a business where they're thriving, they're growing, where they're producing the maximum output, right? Based on the cost. At this point, in California and in Kern County, to produce the same barrel of oil that it did 25 years ago it doesn't make sense in the economy scale, right? Years ago, we had to really bring it from a local perspective to a global perspective. We had a global exchange, a global learning exchange, where folks from South America, from the continent of Africa, from Asia, came to Kern County. And what they said is, these are folks from Ecuador, these are folks from Brazil, folks from the People's Republic of Congo, and they said, Gus, when we think about California and when we see California from outside of the United States, it's Hollywood, it's beaches, it's sports cars, but we took them to the oil fields in Kern County, and the reality was much, much different, right? In their own country, they did not see these practices, right? Where tens of thousands of oil wells being literally placed next to communities, next to community gardens, next to schools. Even for them, it was something very, very impactful to see, right? And so what does that mean? Like, what does that mean for community-based solutions and community-based organizations, right? At this moment, right, we're talking about a just transition and the impacts of the oil and gas industry in our communities, right, in our frontline communities. I think from the very get-go, it needs to start with a buffer, right? Like this industry cannot continue to do business as usual, literally 100 feet from daycare centers, 100 feet from trailer parks in these communities, right? We know that in Contra Costa and in LA, they have the largest refineries in the state. However, the largest refineries in Kern County are in the most disadvantaged communities. It's mind blowing that you have refineries that are producing, say, 20,000 barrels of crude a day, 20,000, 35,000 barrels of crude a month, and are across the street from some of the most impoverished communities in California, right? Where you overlay virus screen in these communities, you just see purple and red, right? You overlay the toxic carb, air permitting map that they have, and it's all, every facility around there is permitted, right? So it needs to start with the setback in these communities, right? And then we need to start really looking at the most extreme methods of extraction in these communities and start looking at how beneficial those are, one, to the community, two, to the community, but also for the future, right? For the future of these children. In these communities that Ingrid, myself work in, we have drone imageries, satellite imageries of children playing in playgrounds and using infrared technology, looking at, gas storage tanks across the street with plumes of methane coming out of these tanks, right? And unfortunately, practices like that, because here in Kern County, they're quote unquote small producers, oftentimes have loopholes that these small producers go through, right? So the community also has very little power to do anything against these industries that are protected by these legislations, right? By these weak legislations, right? And so, from here, we need to see in this conversation of just transition, there needs to be an equitable and a just conversation, right? Where these communities, these frontline communities, are the first, along with the workers, that see these benefits thrive, right? And with that, I'll leave it. Thank you very much for allowing me this time to talk.
Well, thanks very much, Gustavo. Really appreciate your perspective and your experience there in Kern County. We're a little bit behind already, so I just want to pitch in one question here, and we're going to have more Q&A at the end, so I'll retain some of the questions for Ingrid and Gustavo for later, along with the other questions. Just one question though it's a question that's been on my mind quite a bit, and I think this is for you, Ingrid. Talking about the orphan wells, the abandoned wells, and the degree to which capping them or mediating them can provide employment. Can you speak to how many jobs and over what period of time those jobs might be sort of active?
Yeah, and I think that's the $1 million question. And I think it really depends on how fast we clean them up. Obviously, when you think about that big number, which is all of the wells that we anticipate needing cleanup, that's a rather large number. So even though one well cleanup might not take a long time, when you just multiply it by the 100,000 wells that need to be cleaned up, I think that that means that we can scale up. There's no figures that I have seen. I have heard estimates of 9,000 jobs over 10 years nationwide. But I don't have those figures myself. And I think that is something that we are currently trying to calculate by talking with remediation contractors. And I think that is the question. And then also looking at the similarity of those jobs with the brownfields cleanups, that again is a way to expand out the number of jobs that is potentially available in this broader remediation field. So
thanks very much. Yeah, safe to say probably many, many years of work there. Okay, we're going to shift into the second half of our webinar and move to Greg Karras and Steve Gary. We're going to go with Greg first to give us an overview of decommissioning refineries in California. Greg wrote a fantastic report back in July. It was published back in July, Decommissioning California Refineries. And so I urge everyone to take a look at that if you haven't yet. Greg, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Woody. So y'all, where I come from, your father might come home late one night, filthy, shaking, try to explain to the family about the explosion in the plant and the neighbor kids' dads that we won't be seeing anymore. I was 6, first time that happened to me. I was the first person in my family to make it through 4-year college. I decided I wanted to do science for and with the people in the shadow of the smokestacks, talking about the refining centers in LA, Bay Area. I worked for CBE, Communities for a Better Environment, for a long time. So long that I remember, Woody, working with you there. And, you know, one of the things we learned is that, and communities in the shadow of the smokestacks know, is that if you're not there by the oil wells, you forget or you don't even know what's going on. So I'm going to show you some slides. And want to ask you to imagine something. Imagine the petroleum fuel chain is a huge bus speeding toward a cliff, and everyone is on it, but we can't get to the brakes because the petrostate we live in has trapped too many of us at the back of the bus. Now imagine that oil refining is the lock on this climate crisis driver, and just transitions are the key. California communities host the dominant oil refining center in all of Western North America. And that's more important than you might think, because mountains isolate this refining center from the big refining centers in Texas, Gulf Coast, and other parts of the US. California refines 3 times the crude extracted in the state, makes that oil burnable in transport and industry, and exports refined fuels across the West Coast and the Pacific Rim. So I'm talking about a fuel chain here, right? The oil can't be burned in our cars and factories if it's not refined, and it wouldn't be extracted if it's not refined. And we're doing it here big time. Well to wheel, the oil refined here emits more carbon than all other activities in the state combined. This chart shows cumulative emissions because that's what drives climate impact. It assumes all non-petroleum emissions are cut to their state climate targets. The total statewide emissions would still exceed the red line, and by a lot. How much depends on whether the refineries switch to higher or lower carbon oil. That's plausible, but even if they go to the lowest average carbon oil refined in the US and more, they only go down from where they are now, scenario S1, that line in the chart, down to scenario S4. The red line is the climate limit. It's defined by state climate targets through 2050. This is the state's share of global carbon cuts to between 1.5 and 2 degrees C. So this shows that even if we do everything else, we must refine less oil if we hope for a livable climate. California is no exception to the global consensus about that. But think about the cumulative emissions again. Cumulative emissions force steeper refining cuts to meet our climate limit if we delay. This example shows that for 2 annual refining cut trajectories with no change in the carbon intensity of oil. The black curve waits until 2029, while the green curve starts in 2021. Both trajectories meet the 2050 climate limit because the difference in cumulative emissions before the two curves cross is the same as the difference after the two curves cross, right? But the delay forces cutting refining rates much more steeply until it's too late. And if more refining capacity is lost in a year to make those steeper, deeper rate cuts, more of the community's oil-dependent tax and jobs base needs to be replaced with sustainable alternatives that fast, or we risk serious transition impacts or break our climate, or both. The increase in transition impact potential with delay is shown by the height of the black, red, and orange bars in this chart. The black bars are the likely case, but the red bars, that's still plausible. Note the 20% mark. Few, if any, California communities that host refineries have grown their tax base 20% in a single year, right? And those taxes are jobs for teachers, librarians, public services that Ingrid was talking about. So thinking that this is only about oil workers is dead wrong. This is about everyone in our communities in the oil belt. It's about our livelihood, our health, and our home. And this is the transition feasibility, the climate protection feasibility crisis coming to us soon if we fail to act now. This is the cliff we need to break for before it's too late. The report shown on my first slide describes all this and what we can do about it in detail. But you know, the big truth here is that we need to talk about how we are going to break free from our toxic relationship with oil before it takes us over a cliff. If we wait, we face steep refining cuts or else climate failure. Waiting for those steep cuts could foreclose even the possibility of just transitions we can create together starting now. And without real justice for communities and workers, the climate action everyone needs has not, in fact, proved feasible politically. I'm going to say that again. Without real justice, the climate action we need, and we all see this, it has not yet proved feasible politically. Denial of this reality is perhaps the most dangerous problem with California politics right now. And we can change that if we act now together. The California Climate Scoping Plan review that is starting this year might be our last chance. So Steve, hope I've warmed you up.
Whenever you're ready.
Thanks very much, Greg. You know, before I pitch it over to you, Steve, I just wanted to remind folks, and Nina, if you could put into the chat the link to the Climate Safe California endorsement. Just a reminder to folks that if you haven't, or if you joined us late, we do have our flagship campaign, the Climate Safe California campaign, that aims to get state of California on track for carbon neutrality by 2030. And we want to get the policies in place by 2025 to get us there. Need that in the chat. So please, if you have not endorsed yet, please consider that. And so with that, I would now like to bring to our last presenter, longtime refinery worker and environmental advocate and justice advocate with a labor perspective, Steve Gary. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, and thanks for everyone for being here today. Just a little bit of an intro. I did spend 25 years working for Shell and Tesoro and refineries in Washington State. I retired in 2015. At that point, for a number of years, I'd been president of Steelworkers Local 591, representing refinery workers. And since that time, since 2015, up to last month, I worked with Washington State Blue-Green Alliance. It's important to know that those affiliations are in my past. I'm going to speak as much as I can about what I believe those organizations advocate for, but I don't speak for them. I speak for myself. I'm going to try to talk a little bit about how labor organizations approach this concept of just transition, the history of that, how labor organizations are different from many of the other organizations that understand the importance of the role that needs to play. In this discussion, I want to talk a little bit about union goals and give you a sense of what the United Steelworkers in particular are probably thinking about this issue and about their membership. First, labor organizations are in some ways uniquely different than some of the other organizations that we need to have play a role in this issue. Basically, the people that become members of unions, like refinery workers, don't voluntarily join a union and go to work. They're chosen by the employers, by the oil companies, to do a job in the refinery. And then after that time, they become members of a labor union. And in many cases, for example, the people I represent in Washington State, they chose to become members. They weren't forced to, and they could opt out if they wanted to. Most of our members, most of our employees did choose to become members, but they didn't have to remain members. And the bottom line is really that because they're hired by the employers, they bring with them the whole range of opinions and experiences that we know exist in the overall population. And of course, we know that that's becoming more partisan all the time. So they're certainly not like someone, say, from an environmental organization. The Sierra Club helped to create Blue-Green Alliance with the steelworkers about 15 years ago. People choose to join the Sierra Club because they admire them and they want to support them. That's not necessarily the case with refinery workers and other union members. One of the other realities about labor unions is that though people join and support them, they pay their dues, they may or may not know much about what the union officers and leadership understands, particularly if they don't go to union meetings on a regular basis, and many of them do not. So while union leaders and staff are going quite often to conferences, conventions, and other training opportunities to learn about history, to learn about current affairs issues, economic issues, and the like, and become educated, the rank and file does not necessarily understand the same thing. And so it can become difficult to speak about very, very contentious issues like the need to transition with rank and file union members because those union leaders need to get reelected from time to time. And so it's quite a different kind of dynamic. There is a history with this term just transition, particularly among those who represent refinery workers. Most refinery workers in this country are represented by the United Steelworkers now. They are represented by that organization through merger. Our predecessor union was Oil Chemical Atomic Workers, OCA. My understanding of this history is that this term just transition was actually discussed openly by OCA leadership back in the late 60s and early 70s as the Environmental Protection Agency was being developed. They pointed out that while they were in support of environmental protection, they also wanted money made available to take care of workers who were laid off as companies closed and moved. While there was a lot of money made available for Superfund cleanup for dirt, there was no money made available for workers and for communities. And at that time, OCA leadership would talk about the need for a just transition, saying that there needed to be at least as much effort to protect workers and communities as there were dollars available to protect dirt. And this is the kind of history that union leadership often knows, but rank and file in the refining industry oftentimes does not know. I'll talk a little bit about union goals to the extent I think they're likely to approach these kinds of issues. The very first priority for a labor union is most likely to be to protect existing jobs, to do what can be done to protect existing jobs, not to sugarcoat the issue, not to make promises that can't be delivered necessarily, but to do what can be done to try to predict existing employment from the most catastrophic job losses long enough to make this transition more manageable. In that way, they're likely to try to prevent what we've seen oftentimes in the industry in response to declining markets for their products. We'll see these organizations, these corporations shut down production and turn the plant into a terminal operation. That lays off most of the hourly workers, keeps a skeleton crew to operate the equipment necessarily to bring the material in, to store it, and then to ship it out. And then the final thing we'll see sometimes is we'll see an employer go to bankruptcy, sometimes a created bankruptcy, which not only sometimes allows them to try to walk away from their cleanup obligations, but also walk away from pension obligations for the workforce and stuff like that. So the union is going to try to prevent that kind of stuff. So their first priority is going to be job protection. They're going to want to see these plants run as long as it's possible, even if they have to run at reduced rates. And they have an advantage here. Oil refining is not like most other manufacturing businesses. If you were making lumber and the market for lumber drops, you lay off the graveyard shift, you lay off the swing shift, you turn the lights off in the afternoon, go home and turn them back on in the morning. You can't do that with refining. Those facilities have to run 24/7 when they run. The most dangerous times are startup and shutdown. And once those facilities are up and running, everybody wants to see them run as long as possible and as safely as possible. And we know that they can do that even if they're running at half their rated capacity. They may be rated, they may be able to process 200,000 barrels a day. They can keep everybody employed processing 100,000 barrels a day if the employer chooses to do that. They don't want to, but it is possible. They're also going to want to look at every opportunity to produce things like biofuels or to process other kinds of feedstocks in order to prevent catastrophic job loss, keep as many people working as long as possible. Their second priority, and only if they failed with the first, is to protect the worker. If they fail to protect the job, they want to protect the worker. Several years ago, I was actively involved in writing an initiative here in Washington State, Initiative 1631, which was a carbon fee with revenue to be used in a number of different ways to create incentives and opportunities to move more quickly to a renewable energy future. One of the most significant potential policy advantages of 1631 was to take a slipstream of the revenue created to make real income protection, benefit protection, and other protections available to refinery workers that lost their jobs as a result of declining markets for fossil fuels. Those kinds of benefits would have included income protection, continuation of their medical health coverage, their retirement security benefits like their pension plans, as well as income insurance, which we thought was important. If somebody loses a $40 an hour job, can only find a $25 an hour job, income insurance can pick up the difference. We felt these benefits should be in place for at least 3 to 5 years, give people a glide path to retirement if necessary, and make this transition more manageable for those who are forced to deal with losing the best job they've ever had. I'll say that justice, we recognize, is a matter of perspective. I've been trying to explain what justice may look like for refinery workers and others working in the business. Obviously, as we've heard our other panels explain, the reality, justice looks quite different. If you're a resident in a fence line community, it looks quite different if you're concerned about your community budgets and how you fund everything from the local school district to everything else that needs to be done. And all of those concerns must be addressed if we are to have justice. I think as others have said, and I think the unions know this, Blue Green Alliance knows this, the transition is underway. It's going to happen. We do not know if there will be justice observed by many at the end. If there is to be justice, it has to be done because we insist upon it and because we constantly look for common cause and work together, to collaborate together. It can be done. It should be done. It's up to us to make it happen. So thank you all for being here today.
Very, very well said. Very well put, Steve. Thanks so much. And thanks to all the presenters. We are in our last half hour and we are going to shift to Q&A. You know, folks, on these webinars, we never have time. There's so much stuff I see coming into the chat. Nina, I hope we're going to be saving the chat. And I think, you know, hopefully follow up with folks afterward for some of these questions, and feel free to ping us afterward. But let's go back to the extraction side. One of the earliest questions that came in, and it's kind of a combo question, Ingrid and Gustavo, which is question around what can be done at the local, say county level to promote a just transition. What role can local governments play? And then just to also add in this question, which is, can you speak to the degree to which the companies that are doing the extraction themselves, how is it that they are not responsible for the cleanup of their own wells? So what can you do at the local level, and why aren't the extracting industries responsible? If you can speak to that. Either one.
Yeah, I can quickly go. I mean, I think at the local level, workforce development boards, local workforce development boards have a large part to play here. And you know, training programs, working with local institutions. You know, LA is working on, they have a just transition workforce that the local government has ordered. So I think there's quite a lot to generate conversation, to use your local workforce development boards, partner with local community colleges and training institutions. So I think there's a lot that can be done, and probably a lot more that needs to be done. With the liability issue, well, technically the oil and gas companies do have to clean up their oil wells, and they have to properly abandon and plug them. Unfortunately, what tends to happen is rather they sit them idle. They pay a very, very small nominal fee every year, and it allows them to avoid the cleanup. There are bonding the bonding requirements to ultimately clean up, but recent studies have shown they are vastly underfunded. And so the liabilities to the state are, just dramatically more than what they now have in their possession to clean up the site. So technically they are liable. Reality, there's just not enough funds that have been set aside by the oil and gas companies to cover their liabilities.
Yeah, Woody, it's Greg. Could I tag on this answer?
You sure can, Greg. I want to make sure we give Gustavo a chance to chime in, but go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, disconnected here for a bit, but yes, I think on the bringing it back to the local level, what are folks able to do? Something that we have been actively doing here is working with both the Kern County Planning Commission, so looking at the Planning Commission and how to get folks from, especially the frontline communities, to be participatory folks, in the planning process. The planning process, documents are very scary, and if you've never done one before, it can be a little bit intimidating. But thanks to organizations like the ones on the ground, we've been able to capacitate folks to really give them the leadership to really be their own advocates, right? Something that CRP does, and there's something that we CCJ don't do is speak for residents, right? We develop their leadership and they go on their way, right? We just support them in whatever technical capacity might come around. But even like the community of Shafter, if you look at the most kind of extreme methods of extraction, hydraulic fracking and other acidation practices, they happen in and around the communities of Shafter. Currently, we're leading the way, and it's a pretty awesome partnership with the city of Shafter to work at a very more inclusive level on, potential setbacks, looking at different mitigation efforts within the city planning process that will plan the city for the next, 10, 15 years. So really taking advantage of those opportunities from a local perspective seems to be something that will have, a great outcome.
Cool. Thanks, Gustavo. Greg, you wanted to say something on this?
Yeah. Interestingly enough, the answer to this question involves the term extraction or extractive industry. Refinery communities have come to use that term because the industry extracts wealth from the community and health from the community. And it acts the same way, in the same MO. So the thing that I think I've learned is that there's a crucial, irreplaceable role for local action. I mean, think about land use planning, and think about this. It was more than a century ago that the Contra Costa refineries got built where they were, because the wealthy and privileged who had moved from San Francisco down into northern San Mateo County didn't like the dirty smokestacks. They chose to put them there. Then think about the offshore oil moratorium that we've had for decades now on our wealthier coast. And then think about what Gustavo and Ingrid are talking about. It's still happening. With refining, we really kind of proved that, or communities did, from Richmond to Rodeo to San Luis Obispo and Napomo. Over the last 10 years, more than half of the major refinery tar sands expansion projects have been stopped. All of those were by localized, organized community action, encouraging or forcing local governments to use their land use authority. So it's, the truth is that local community actions have always decided where oil industry is located in California and how much of it is built. And now that's changing in a way where poor communities of color are rising to organize the power to have their own say.
Okay. Thank you. Maybe we'll go to a question on the refining side. I think you already spoke to this. I think this gets to the imported oil. The question was around how much do California refineries refine for California versus outside usage. But also, are there any ideas around a tax on imported oil to fund a just transition or climate action? Seems like that could be a large revenue source. Is that an idea that's been floated, Greg, or anyone?
So I'm not a lawyer, but I'm guessing there might be some commerce clause, even international trade issues with that. It's also keep in mind that there's lots of things you could tax. You could tax the industry's profits. You could have bonds on the industry, like nuclear power plant. They've got to put up the money in a trust fund in advance for cleaning up the radioactivity when they go away. So back to what Steve Gary said, what about treating workers at least as well as we treat dirt? What about putting up the money to clean up the mess they made in our economy when they go away? So there's lots of ideas that are being talked about. Whether an oil import tax is a good idea, considering that we absolutely have to be greatly reducing that at the same time that we absolutely have to be managing the decline of our own oil resource extraction. I think that there's some fertile ground for thinking about that, but I guess I would caution against taxing something that's going away.
Any other comment on that one?
I have just a little bit of a comment, and really more for the last question. I think I would point out that though I'm not a lawyer either, it's my understanding that one of the reasons why the industry finds it acceptable sometimes to, in the face of declining markets or reduced market demand, to shut a facility down, lay off most of the production workers and turn the place into a terminal is because continuing to do business like that, profitable business, allows them to avoid the legal the legal triggers that often mandate cleanup if they were to completely stop doing business altogether. One of the reasons then bankruptcy is considered favorable if it goes that far is because bankruptcy allows them to engage the courts then to avoid those cleanup costs as well as other costs that they would otherwise be required to do to support the laid off workforce. So again, these are big battles that we're going to have to work our way through.
We've got a question here that I think could be sort of responded to on both sides of the equation here, which is, but the question was posed around the Kern County situation, which is, apart from remediating, capping wells, what other good pay might be out there? I mean, you know, quite often you'll hear people say, oh, they can get jobs in renewable energy. Well, you know, one of the tough parts is that they're not necessarily the same kind of quality, you know, same kind of wages and benefits and whatnot. And that, are there other, you know, what other industries can be looked at? What other possibilities are there for transition to other jobs?
Well, first, they should be. That's a labor standards issue, and that's part of our fight. Second, I'd say that it's crucial to keep in mind that every community, every part of our environment is unique, and what the transition looks like, where the jobs are, where the good jobs that really make sense for the environment, for the community, for people's pocketbooks, they're unlikely to look the same in Bakersfield as they do in Richmond, right?
Yeah, I had two
Go ahead, Aguirre.
answers. Yeah, one is, you know, in particular with Kern County, not only, you know, it's very degraded, it's got the worst air quality, it's got some of the highest unemployment. There's a lot of lists that Kern County tops for all the wrong reasons. But that also presents opportunities because one area that it really lacks is infrastructure. And so, you know, really investing in Kern County in terms of increasing its infrastructure, electrification, you know, it sits right in between LA and Bay Area. You know, there's a lot of infrastructure and construction needs in Kern County to bring it up to the standards that the rest of the state enjoys. And then secondly, we're doing a regional plan just for this purpose of really bringing stakeholders together, centering workers, centering communities to define for itself what makes sense for Kern. What are those sectors that make sense for Kern? So we're really excited. Again, we just got the announcement last week that we do have this grant to work on this specific question. So, and I think that's the right way to do it is really to let people that are impacted lead those conversations and do a deep dive into identifying those sectors.
Great, thanks. So we're getting to the end of our Q&A period. I do want to let folks know all these questions I've been asking are questions that were posed by the attendees, by you. So just wanted to make that clear. So I'll ask another one, maybe time for one more after that, but we're getting down to the wire here. You know, there have been there's been legislation proposed, I think, just about every year for many years now to institute a severance tax, oil extraction tax in the state of California. Is something that we should look to as a possibility for, you know, for funding the transition process? Anybody have thoughts on that? That's a question from Debbie Mytels.
That sounds like an attempt to do what Washington State was trying to do with our initiative 1631. We wanted to put a fee on carbon pollution, use those fees to make significant effective investments all over the state of Washington that would allow people to make different kinds of decisions about their lives, allow them to use renewable energy, make renewable energy more readily available, employ people that are historically disadvantaged, as well as protect workers that might have to make a change. All of those outcomes are possible if we have the revenue to do it, the will to do it. It is a heavy political lift. 1631 came close, within a couple percentage points at the ballot of being enacted in Washington State. I think it is possible to do things like that. We do have to overcome this kind of political tendency for people to know what they want, but not necessarily be prepared to pay for it. It would be ideal if we could make the major oil companies pay for what we need to do, but we need to do it whether we can force them to pay or not. At some point, we have to convince everyone in the world to do a little bit if necessary, to do their fair share. If it takes higher fuel costs, if it takes anything that it takes to get this work moving forward and create the investment dollars necessary to make clean energy more readily available and to employ people in the process, we need to prepare to do it. Sometimes the costs for something like 1631 were thought to be no more than a couple cups of Starbucks coffee every month. That doesn't seem like a lot, but some people think it is. We need to overcome that.
Thanks very much, Steve. And I want to thank all the presenters. That's all the time we have now for questions. So thank you very much. And we will move to Nina now, who will provide us with some actions that folks can take. Nina?
Hi, hello, thank you. Again, my name is Janina Turner. I am the Energy Program Coordinator here with the Climate Center. I want to thank all of you again for participating in today's webinar about the phase out of fossil fuels. I hope you've already endorsed Climate Safe California, and if not, I'm going to reshare that link in the chat one more time. But we do want to move on to some other important actions. So we know that to secure a climate safe future here in California, we need to transition away from dangerous and toxic extractive systems such as fracking and drilling. We've known this for a while, but to make this transition our reality, California needs to ban fracking and ensure a just transition for workers and communities that have been directly impacted by the fossil fuel industry. So one of the two actions I'm going to ask you to take with me today is to contact your representatives and urge them to support Senate Bill 467 to end fracking and dangerous drilling and to foster a just transition here in California. So to do that, I'm going to drop another link in the chat, which will take you to our website. And from there, you'll see there's a pre-filled letter that you will send out. The only way to do that is just to fill out the information above that. Pretty simple, just name, email, address. I'll give you a minute to fill that out. This letter will be sent to your state senator, your assembly member, and to Governor Gavin Newsom. And this will let them know that this is of the utmost importance to you and to all Californians. So again, I'll give you a few seconds to fill out that form, and I'll drop it again in the chat if you missed it the first time. Okay, so if you're still working on it, no problem, keep doing it. I do want to intro another action that we're going to take today. So this was pretty simple, pretty easy, and we're just going to do this one more time. The next action we're going to take will be sent to the California Air Resources Board, also known as CARB, and we're going to urge them to make a plan for the gradual decommissioning of refining capacity in California. We want CARB to acknowledge that beginning a phased decommissioning of refining capacity now is an essential way to achieve state climate goals. This is crucial because a phased ramp down allows for a just transition of workers, and the only way we can get there in time required to protect our climate is if we start now. So I'm going to drop another link, and it will be the exact same process that we just did before. So you'll just fill out your name, email, address, and it will also have a pre-filled email that will be sent to the California Air Resources Board. So I'll give you all another few seconds to fill that out. Okay, well, thank you for taking action with us today. If you didn't have time to fill it out right now, keep those tabs open, fill it out when this webinar ends, and I will pass it back to the next person to close us out.
Thanks very much, Nina, and thank you everybody for taking action. I just want to offer a few sort of summary wrap-up comments here, and I'll try to be quick, so I'll pass it off to Duran to close us out. First we heard from Senator Wiener. That was quite a treat, and he pointed out that although California is only 1 or 2% of the global emissions, we're a leader, and the rest of the country and really the world often looks to California for leadership. So it's important what we do here. He also really emphasized the degree to which we need to address the structural racism that has historically burdened society, and that can be a big part of the transition. It needs to be for everyone. Ingrid talked about commonalities among various stakeholders, shared goals for health and a good economy and good places to live, work, and play. That the industry, the oil extraction industry at least, is in decline, and it's not driven by regulation, it's driven by market forces. We need to manage decline, and there are opportunities. We need high road employment to replace high road employment. Gustavo talked about how most of the oil extracted in the state, around 75%, comes from Kern County. And the county itself at the local level is actually passing ordinance that enable more drilling. Not good. And this is in areas that are geographically close to communities. It's right where people live. So not okay. The EIR they're considering will allow, did you say 40,000 new wells? Holy Toledo. Anyway, so I guess I heard that right. And they say, oh, it's in unincorporated areas, but I live in unincorporated county. People live in unincorporated county areas. Greg Karras pointed to the fact that we're all on a speeding bus, and the petro state is in the lead, and the just transition can hold the key. California is a dominant refiner in the Western US. It refines 3 times the amount of crude that exists, that's extracted from the state. So most of it is actually imported. Even if we do everything else on the climate front, we must refine less oil. And he really emphasizes if we delay the decommissioning process, it's going to be much harder. Those abrupt changes that would happen with job loss and tax-based loss and all that. And that's why we had that action for you to take today. And Steve Gary, the main role of unions, it's to protect jobs. So you're doing your job to defend good jobs. And I think the takeaway I got from what you said, Steve, is that it's not just going to happen. We're going to have to make a just the just part of just transition. We'll have a transition one way or the other, but to make it something that's humane and it lands us in a place where everyone is no one's left behind, that's going to take a lot of work. And so I think that's something that we've learned today. So I think that's most of what I wanted to say. Again, I wanted to thank all the presenters. I learned a lot and really appreciate everybody's participation. And Duran, I think you wanted to just close things out a bit.
Yeah, thank you so much. You hear me okay?
Yes.
Good. Yeah, thank you, Woody. And I'd like to just add my voice to the voices of all the hundreds of people who are here today, to Greg, to Ingrid, to Steve, and to you, Gustavo. Gracias. Thank you all for your support, for your work, and not only for what you said and did here today, but more importantly, for what you say and do every day out in the community. Climate safe California and a future beyond fossil fuels is going to take a lot of work. It's going to take collaboration with labor and with environmental justice, with our elected officials and the rest. And that's what we hope to continue to do here at the Climate Center. Build coalitions. That's what we're about. Working in partnership is what we believe in. Just to remind you, Climate Safe California is a campaign to accelerate state climate policy timelines to achieve net negative emissions. We want to capture more carbon than we're emitting by 2030. We believe that's possible, but that means moving up our current state targets 15 years from 2045, where they currently stand, to 2030, because 2045 is simply too late. As we heard here today, there's a lot of reasons why we need to slow the bus down and find a different way to power that bus. Thank you for that analogy, Greg. I said I'd report on how many endorsements we got. I want to thank you all. We are at 51 individuals and 7 organizations have added their names to the voices of those who are supporting Climate Safe California. That includes some great nonprofits, Climate Health Now, thank you for your endorsement, Post Carbon Institute, and Dr. Richard Heinberg, thank you for your endorsement. So we hope you will all join all of those and all the hundreds of others who are on board with us. More importantly, we hope you'll all continue to do the work you do. We thank you all. We know that of the hundreds of people who are here today, every single one of you is involved in this industry and in this struggle in some way. So we thank you for that. As a reminder, our next webinar will be on March 24th that is on resilient communities, another very important topic. We hope you'll sign up and join. I see some of you already did that today. So lots of opportunities. Please go to theclimatecenter.org if you'd like to find out more information about us. And I'll just close one more time by thanking all of our speakers and all of our attendees. And also, I'd just like to take a moment before we close to thank all of our sponsors, Renewable America, Enphase, and I will just put those up on the screen one more time here to close us out. Oops, pardon me. To close us out here with one more thank you for our sponsors, without whom we could not do this. So thank you to Renewable America. Thank you to Enphase. Thank you to Jackson Family Wines. You all have been very helpful in putting this together. Thank you to MCE, Willow Creek Wealth Management, Bay Area Air Quality Management District, Peninsula Clean Energy, Sunrun, and Terra Verde. All of you have been great. We really appreciate it. Thank you all for coming. We look forward to seeing you next time. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.